In the last video on epithelial tissues, we looked at how to identify them, how to recognize them in a slide. Now that you can do that, let's talk about how to name those tissues. Our objective for this video is to be able to name epithelial tissues when we see them. Now, when we name epithelial tissues, we're going to have a two-part name. The first part of the name tells you how many layers of cells there are in that tissue, and the second part of the name tells you about the types of cells. So if there's only one layer of cells, like what you see in this left column of this figure, then the name is going to be simple. That's a simple epithelium. If there's more than one layer of cells, like you see on the right side of this slide, then that's called stratified. Stratified, okay? Now there are three cell shapes that we're going to see with our epithelial tissues. The first one is called squamous, and your squamous shaped cells look like fried eggs. They're very flat, which allows substances to pass through them very easily. So you see them in structures that do a lot of filtration or that do a lot of transport of substances, so squamous. So since this tissue has one layer of epithelial cells and the epithelial cells are squamous, this is a simple squamous epithelium. How do I know there's only one layer of cells? Because the layer of cells basically sits on top of this basement membrane, and the apical surface does not have other epithelial cells on it. This is a stratified squamous epithelium. How do I know it's stratified? There's more than one layer of cells over here, and the cells that are on the apical side of the membrane are squamous. So this would be a stratified squamous epithelium, no matter what kinds of cells are down here, deeper in the tissue. It gets the name squamous because the cells that are closest to the apical surface, these right here on the top, are all squamous shaped. Okay. This next set of tissues, this is cuboidal. Okay. The cells are cuboidal. This is a simple epithelium, so this is a simple cuboidal epithelium. Cuboidal cells are roughly the same width as they are tall. So they look like little cubes or little squares. This is a stratified cuboidal epithelium because there's more than one layer of epithelial cell, okay, above the basement membrane, and importantly, the uppermost layer, the apical cells, are all cuboidal. This is a simple columnar epithelium. Why is it called simple columnar? Because there's only one layer of cells and they look like columns. So they are longer than they are wide. So this is a simple columnar epithelium. Here we have a stratified columnar epithelium. It's called stratified because there's more than one layer of cells, but it's a stratified columnar because the apical layer of cells are columnar in shape. They look like columns. Now over here, it kind of got cut off, is a special type of epithelium. This is called a pseudostratified epithelium. It's a pseudostratified because it looks like the tissue has more than one layer of cells. But it turns out that each cell is actually connected to the basement membrane, so it's really a simple epithelium, but it looks like it's stratified. If you look over at these other drawings and you look at where the nuclei are, for the simple epithelia, when it's a squamous epithelium, the nucleus is kind of in the middle. Same for the simple cuboidal, but here for the simple columnar, they're all towards the basal surface of the cell. And I could almost draw like a chain going from nucleus to nucleus. Okay. Over here for the stratified, I can draw a chain, nucleus to nucleus, and I can see that there's more than one layer of cells. Same here, because it looks like two lines. For your pseudostratified, the nuclei are going to be all over the place. You won't get two straight lines. It's almost as if you took a bunch of nuclei, put them in a cup, shook the cup up like the nuclei were a bunch of dye, and then cast them out onto the surface of the cells. They'll just be a big jumble of cells. To help you understand this better, why don't we take a look at some tissues and see if we can name them and recognize their characteristics. Simple squamous epithelium is formed by one single layer of flat, fried egg-like cells. And we're going to see this type of epithelium lining some of the cavities in the body. We also find it lining the entire circulatory system. It's very prevalent in the kidneys, where it's involved in filtrating blood plasma in order to make urine. So the first place we're going to see it as an example is here at the glomerulus. So do you see how there is like a line that goes here, and then there's like a little bulge? Line, 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 all the way here, forming the lining of this glomerulus, and then here's another bulge. Line, 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 bulge. So the bulges are nuclei for these simple squamous epithelial cells. And the line that I'm talking about is basically where you have cytoplasm and plasma membrane. So you can see that this type of tissue is exceedingly thin, which is going to again aid in the filtration and diffusion of substances within the body. This is the lung. There are these little air-filled sacs deep within the lung called alveoli, and they are the site of gas exchange. So carbon dioxide gets exchanged for oxygen, and it happens over this very thin layer of simple squamous epithelium. So again, you can see the cytoplasm and the plasma membrane here, and then the nucleus of the cell just appears as a dark purple bulge. This is a capillary on the right, and the lining of the capillary is formed again by another simple squamous epithelium. It actually has a special name. It's called the endothelium. Okay, but you can see it's this very, very thin layer here with a nucleus here for one of our simple squamous cells. Here's more of that thin layer. Here's another nucleus, thin layer. Here's a nucleus, so on and so forth. So again, what I hope to impress upon you here is that these are very, very thin layers. Simple cuboidal tissues consist of one layer of cuboidal cells. And remember, your cuboidal cells are roughly as long as they are wide. So they look like little cubes or little squares. We're going to find this type of tissue in the kidney. Sometimes it's in the respiratory system, in the ovary. We'll find it a number of different places, but we very commonly find it lining ducts and tubules. So anywhere where you have a lot of ducts, like in the skin, for example, or in certain organs, or maybe you have a lot of tubules, you're going to see a lot of this type of tissue. It's involved in absorption and transport. So if you look really closely here, you can see the little square-like cells that are lining this tubule from the kidney. This is simple cuboidal epithelium, and you can kind of see that it forms a tube, where the tube would be coming out of your computer screen and passing through the back of your computer. So we're looking down the middle of the tube. This is from the thyroid, and again, this is a simple cuboidal epithelium. It's important in delivering thyroid hormone to other parts of the body. And then this is in the kidney as well. So again, you can kind of see these little small cuboid cells tightly packed together, lining this duct. Now this is simple columnar. You can kind of see how there's one layer and all of these cells are basically connected to the basement membrane here. I know I didn't mention basement membrane in the last two slides, but you do have a basement membrane. Okay, and it supports the epithelium. So here you can see the rectangular shaped cells all closely packed together. They each have one nucleus. Here, I'll show you over here. This is simple cuboidal. There's only one layer of cells on top of the basement membrane, which separates the epithelium from the connective tissue. Here's another one. This one actually makes a duct. This is from the salivary gland. It helps deliver saliva. But you can see these kind of rectangular shaped cells all packed together. And there's only one layer, so that's why it's called a simple epithelium. So this is simple columnar. We're going to find this type of tissue in the intestines, especially where it helps absorb nutrients. We'll find it in the nasal passages. It's also in other parts of the respiratory system, like around the respiratory bronchioles. Now this is that pseudostratified columnar epithelium that I talked about. Here you can see these are very clearly rectangular shaped cells, but look at the nuclei. It really looks like they were mixed up in a cup and then thrown onto the image, right? They're just a jumble. We couldn't really draw a line from one nucleus to another and form straight lines, right? So that's why this is pseudostratified. Each one of these cells, even though it doesn't look like it, each one of these cells is actually connected to the basement membrane down here, which is why this is pseudostratified. If it was a true stratified epithelium, not all of these cells that you see here would be connected to this basement membrane. Here's another example over here. You can kind of see, again, the nuclei are just kind of all over the place in these cells. Now think about the pseudostratified and look at this. This is another stratified columnar epithelium, but look at the nuclei. They aren't all over the place, are they? I can draw a line from nucleus to nucleus, and you can very clearly see that there are two layers of cells here. That's the difference, okay? Now, remember with a stratified tissue, we name the tissue according to whatever the apical type of cell is going to be, whatever the apical cell is. So in this figure that I've been drawing all over, these are all columnar cells on the apical surface. So that's why this is a stratified columnar epithelium. This is a stratified cuboidal epithelium. So these are the cuboidal cells here on the apical surface. Remember, the apical surface is the one that faces the lumen of a tubule, or on a flat tissue, it's the one that doesn't have more cells on top of it. So you can see there's one layer of nuclei here. This is one set of cells. And then just under that, just deep to that, you can see a second layer of cells. This is another stratified cuboidal. Again, we're looking at the apical cells. They are kind of cuboid, so that's why this is stratified cuboidal. This is stratified squamous epithelium. Okay, if this picture were a little bit clearer, we would clearly see that these cells, especially towards the apical surface, they are very much that flat fried egg shape of cell. The last type of tissue that you need to know for your epithelial tissues is called transitional epithelium. Here we're going to have stratified cuboidal type cells, but the apical cells will be kind of puffy. They look like those biscuits that you get from a can. or they look like jelly donuts. You see how puffy these guys look and rounded? Okay. Now, this type of tissue is typically found in the ureters, the urethra. It's also found in the bladder. Pretty much you'll find it in tissues that have to stretch at some point. So the left two pictures on this slide show you the unstretched version of this tissue. The one here on the right shows you the stretched version, the distended version. So you can kind of see how the cells go from being puffy, like on the left side of the slide, and they kind of flatten out on top here on the right. That's a transitional epithelium. On your exams, I'm probably going to give you something that's more like the left side of the slide than the right, but you do need to be aware that the cells do stretch and flatten out to be squamous-like when the bladder is full of urine, or there's a urine stream going through the ureters or urethra. Now let's practice what you've learned. Each of these images represents some type of epithelial tissue. Take out a piece of paper and number 1 to 6. Then look at each image and name the epithelial tissue. Pause this video while you work, and after you're done, come back and check your answers, see how you did. These are the correct answers. How'd you do? Did you get them all? So in this video, we basically talked about how to name epithelial tissues. Remember that the first part of the name will be simple or stratified. Simple means that there's only one layer of epithelial cells and they are connected to the basement membrane. Stratified means that there's more than one layer of cells, but we're only going to use the apical layer, the most superficial layer, to name the cells. So it doesn't matter what the basal layer of cells is, it's the apical cells that determine the name of the tissue. So if the basal cells are cuboidal, but the apical cells are squamous, then it's going to be a squamous epithelium. We also talked a bit about how to name the cells in an epithelial tissue. That's the second part of the name. So remember, there are three main types of cells that you're looking for. The squamous type, which look like fried eggs. They also sometimes look like tiles in a mosaic from the top. You have the cuboidal cells, which are as wide as they are tall. They look like little sugar cubes. And then we had columnar, which were longer than they were wide. So they look like columns. I hope this video helps. There are practice tissues that you can work with naming. And after you've done all of your reviewing and you feel pretty confident in naming epithelial tissues, take the quizzes for this week's lab. Until next time, good luck.